There's an art to the hustle, and Jason Miller considered himself a master. $15 extra here, a phantom appetizer there, small enough that most customers wouldn't notice, large enough to pad his income nicely. Tonight's Mark sat alone, an elderly woman, elegantly dressed but obviously confused by the menu. Easy money. Or so he thought. Eleanor Blackwood had owned restaurants for over 40 years. Though she'd stepped back from daily operations, her eye for detail remained razor-sharp. Tonight, she was dining incognito at her newest acquisition, a practice that had kept her establishments exceptional for decades. Jason had no idea he just targeted the woman who signed his paychecks. The trap was set. The most dangerous predators are those who don't realize they've become prey. For Jason Miller, 28 and already cynical, this ordinary Tuesday evening would become the performance of his life, with consequences he couldn't imagine. A simple dinner service, a routine scam, and the career he'd built was about to implode spectacularly. Chez Lumiere buzzed with its usual Tuesday night energy. Soft jazz played beneath the clinking of glasses and murmur of conversations. The restaurant had changed hands recently, though little else had altered. Same chef, same staff, same elegant ambiance that had made it a local favorite for years. It remained busy, which suited Jason's purpose perfectly. Jason moved between tables with practiced charm, his dark hair neatly styled, uniform crisp. He'd mastered the art of attentive service, knowing precisely when to appear and when to vanish, how to upsell without seeming pushy, which customers would notice discrepancies on their bills and which wouldn't. The extra cash made his otherwise mediocre salary worthwhile. Tonight had been profitable already, $36 in fabricated charges across 4 tables, all paid without question. As he approached the elegantly dressed older woman sitting alone near the window, he assessed her quickly. Designer clothes, but dated style, expensive jewelry, slightly trembling hands, probably wealthy, possibly forgetful. The perfect mark. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to Chez Lumiere," Jason said, placing a menu before Eleanor with a practiced flourish. "May I start you with something from the bar? Perhaps our house champagne? It's an excellent vintage." His smile was warm, his manner deferential, the performance he'd perfected for older patrons with disposable income. Eleanor glanced up, her gray eyes sharp despite her 78 years. "Just water for now, thank you," she replied, her voice soft but clear. Jason nodded respectfully, already calculating which items he could add to her bill later. A woman dining alone rarely questioned the details, especially one her age. This would be almost too easy. He returned with her water and a basket of fresh bread. "Are you ready to order, or do you have any questions about the menu?" Jason asked, notepad poised. He would guide her toward the more expensive options if possible, though his real profit would come later, with fabricated additions to her bill. "I think I'll start with the French onion soup," Eleanor said, closing the menu decisively, "and the coq au vin for my main course." She handed him the menu with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And perhaps you could tell me how long you've been working here, Jason? I like to get to know the staff." The question caught him off guard. Customers rarely showed interest in servers as people. "About 18 months, ma'am," he answered smoothly, recovering quickly. "It's a wonderful restaurant." His response was automatic, safe, revealing nothing of his actual feelings about the job or his methods of supplementing his income. Something about her direct gaze made him uneasy. 18 months, Eleanor repeated thoughtfully. "So you were here before the ownership change. Interesting." She took a sip of water, watching him over the rim of her glass. "I've heard the new owner is quite particular about service standards. Have you noticed any changes in how things are run?" Jason's smile tightened imperceptibly. No one had mentioned the new owner visiting the restaurant, and he certainly hadn't been introduced to anyone. "Not really," he said with a casual shrug. "Business as usual, as far as the staff is concerned. I'll put your order in right away." He retreated, unsettled by her questions. In the kitchen, he punched her order into the system, adding a $14 appetizer she hadn't requested. A standard move in his playbook. Most customers, especially older ones dining alone, either didn't notice or preferred not to make a scene over discrepancies. He'd perfect the innocent confusion act if questioned, though it rarely came to that. "Order for table 7, he announced, sliding the ticket to the line cook. Chef Marcus glanced at it and raised an eyebrow. The lady ordered escargot? Didn't think that was her style. Jason shrugged non-committally, said she was feeling adventurous. The lie came easily after so much practice. Marcus nodded and turned back to his station. As Eleanor's soup was being prepared, Jason continued his rounds, attending to other tables with his usual charm. Occasionally, his eyes drifted to the elderly woman by the window. She sat with perfect posture, observing the restaurant with quiet attention. Something about her manner put him on edge, though he couldn't pinpoint why. Eleanor sipped her water, taking mental notes. The service flow was inefficient, too many staff hovering near the kitchen, not enough attending to customers. The lighting was slightly too harsh near the bar. Small details, but they mattered. And this waiter, something about him felt off. Her instincts, honed over decades in the business, rarely failed her. When Jason returned with her soup, Eleanor smiled warmly. "This looks wonderful. Tell me, has Chef Marcus changed the recipe recently? I detect a hint of something different." It was a test. She knew the chef had adjusted the broth just last week, information only someone familiar with the kitchen would know. She watched Jason's reaction carefully. Jason hesitated, caught off guard. "I'm not sure about any recipe changes," he admitted, revealing his lie about regular communication with the chef. "But I'm glad you're enjoying it." His smile remained fixed, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. This woman knew more than she should, given her apparent status as a new customer. "Oh, I haven't tasted it yet," Eleanor corrected him gently, her eyes never leaving his face. "I was merely commenting on the aroma." She lifted her spoon deliberately, the diamond on her ring catching the light. "I have quite a sensitive palate. Years in the restaurant business will do that to you." The comment landed like a stone in still water. Jason's practiced smile faltered momentarily before he recovered. "You're in the restaurant business?" he asked, striving for casual interest while mentally reviewing their interaction, searching for mistakes. Had she noticed the extra appetizer already? Was she more alert than he'd assumed? "I've been involved in restaurants for most of my life," Eleanor replied vaguely, blowing gently on her spoonful of soup. "One develops an eye for details, and speaking of details, I don't believe I ordered escargot, yet I see it on the ticket you gave the kitchen. An oversight, perhaps?" Jason's collar suddenly felt too tight. How had she seen the kitchen ticket? Had someone from staff mentioned it? He shifted into damage control mode, his expression morphing into practiced concern. "I'm so sorry for the confusion, ma'am. I must have mixed up orders. I'll remove that immediately." "No harm done," Eleanor said mildly, though her eyes remained sharp and evaluating. "Mistakes happen in busy establishments. I'm curious, though, how often do you find such mistakes occurring with your customers?" The question hung in the air between them, pointed enough that her meaning couldn't be misinterpreted. Jason felt sweat forming at his hairline. This wasn't the confused older woman he'd pegged her for. She was testing him, watching his reactions with unsettling precision. "Very rarely," he assured her with his most sincere expression. "Customer satisfaction is my highest priority. Please enjoy your soup while I check on your main course." He retreated to the kitchen, heart pounding uncomfortably. Something was wrong. He needed to play this carefully. No more additions to her bill. Perfect service from this point forward. As he approached Chef Marcus, he casually removed the escargot from her order. "The lady at 7 changed her mind on the appetizer," he explained smoothly. Marcus gave him a skeptical look. "That's the second change of mind tonight, Jason. Management's been watching the void patterns, you know." The warning was clear, though Marcus kept his voice low. "Just saying, be careful. Word is the new owner's some kind of efficiency expert, been going through all the records with a fine-tooth comb." Jason's stomach twisted unpleasantly. He hadn't heard anything about increased scrutiny of voids and order changes. Had someone reported him? Was his system not as foolproof as he'd believed? He glanced back at Eleanor, who was calmly enjoying her soup, seemingly engrossed in a book she'd pulled from her handbag. When the coq au vin was ready, Jason delivered it personally, his service now flawless and attentive. "Your main course, ma'am," he announced, placing it before Eleanor with precision. "Can I get you anything else? Perhaps a glass of wine to complement the dish?" On the house, of course, to apologize for the earlier confusion. Eleanor looked up from her book, a memoir by a famous restaurateur. Jason noticed with growing unease. "That's very kind," she replied, "but unnecessary. Though I am curious about something. Do you offer complimentary items often or only when customers notice discrepancies in their orders?" Her tone remained conversational, but her gaze was unwavering. The question was a trap, and Jason knew it. Either he admitted to a pattern of discrepancies, or he revealed that free items were his standard damage control method. He chose a third option, partial honesty. "I just want to ensure you have a positive experience," he said carefully. "Customer satisfaction is what keeps restaurants successful." "How true," Eleanor agreed, closing her book. "And what makes a restaurant fail in your experience? Poor food? Inadequate service? Or perhaps," she paused, her eyes holding his, "a breach of trust between establishment and patron?" The question was delivered softly, but landed with the force of an accusation. Jason felt exposed, as if this strange woman could see through the careful facade he'd constructed. "I wouldn't know," he replied, his usual confidence wavering. "I just serve the food." He gestured vaguely toward other tables. "If you'll excuse me, I have other customers to attend to. Please enjoy your meal." He escaped to the relative safety of the service station, where his fellow server, Alicia, was entering orders. "What's with the intense lady at 7? He asked in a low voice. "She's asking weird questions about the restaurant, like she's evaluating everything." Alicia looked up, following his gaze to Eleanor's table. "No idea," Alicia replied, though something in her tone suggested otherwise. "But Ryan said there's a rumor the new owner might be coming in unannounced to evaluate staff. Some kind of undercover boss thing." She raised an eyebrow significantly. "Better be on your best behavior, just in case." Jason's throat went dry as he looked back at Eleanor, now delicately cutting into her coq au vin. It couldn't be. The restaurant had changed hands 3 weeks ago, but no one had met the new owner yet. Management had remained the same, with promises that operations would continue unchanged. Could this unassuming elderly woman really be evaluating them all? Watching Eleanor from a distance, Jason calculated his options. If she was just a perceptive customer, he could smooth things over with exceptional service for the remainder of her meal. If she was more than that, perhaps even the new owner or someone connected to ownership, he needed to do damage control immediately. Eleanor ate methodically, savoring each bite with the practiced evaluation of someone who knew food professionally. The coq au vin was excellent. Chef Marcus was worth retaining. The service, however, needed immediate attention. Particularly this waiter, whose nervous glances in her direction revealed he suspected something was amiss. When Jason returned to clear her plate, Eleanor was ready for him. "The meal was lovely," she said warmly. "Chef Marcus hasn't lost his touch. I'd like coffee and the chocolate soufflé for dessert, please." She handed him the dessert menu with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And the check when you have a moment." "Right away," Jason replied, taking the menu with slightly trembling fingers. He'd decided to play it completely straight. No added items, no mistakes on her bill. Just clean, professional service that might salvage whatever impression she'd formed. "I'm glad you enjoyed the coq au vin. It's one of our signatures." In the kitchen, he placed her dessert order with extra emphasis on its importance. "Soufflé for table 7 needs to be perfect," he told the pastry chef urgently. "I think she might be someone important." The pastry chef raised an eyebrow but nodded. Jason then moved to the computer terminal, carefully constructing Eleanor's check. As he reviewed the order history, his blood ran cold. The system showed every item he'd added and subsequently voided when she'd called him out. Every mistake was logged under his employee ID, creating a clear pattern that anyone reviewing the data would notice. He'd been so careful with the amounts, but not with the digital trail. He printed the check, triple-checking to ensure it reflected only what she'd actually ordered. As he prepared her coffee, he debated confessing preemptively, admitting to occasional input errors and throwing himself on her mercy. But something in those sharp gray eyes told him she already knew everything she needed to know. Eleanor watched Jason's increasingly nervous movements with the dispassionate evaluation of someone who'd seen it all before. 43 years in the restaurant business had taught her every trick, every scam, every method staff used to skim a little extra. Some owners ignored it. Eleanor Blackwood was not one of them. When Jason delivered her coffee and the news that her soufflé would arrive in approximately 8 minutes, Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her. "Join me for a moment, would you, Jason?" It wasn't really a question. Her tone made it clear this was a command, not a request, despite its polite phrasing. Jason hesitated, glancing around the restaurant. Sitting with customers wasn't strictly forbidden, but it certainly wasn't common practice during a busy service. Still, something in Eleanor's demeanor made refusal seem impossible. Reluctantly, he slid into the chair opposite her, perching anxiously on its edge. 18 months is a decent tenure in this industry, Eleanor began conversationally, stirring a small amount of cream into her coffee. "You must enjoy working here to have stayed so long. Tell me, what's your favorite part of the job?" Her eyes remained focused on her cup, giving Jason a false sense that this might be a casual chat. "I enjoy the people," Jason answered carefully, the lies coming automatically after so much practice. "Every table is different, different stories, different preferences, and I take pride in providing excellent service." The words felt hollow as they left his mouth, knowing what she'd already witnessed contradicted everything he claimed to value. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, finally looking up to meet his eyes. "Interesting. And would you say adding items customers didn't order to their bills falls under your definition of excellent service?" The question was delivered calmly, but the accusation it contained was unmistakable. She watched as color drained from Jason's face. There must be some misunderstanding," Jason stammered, his practiced confidence evaporating. "Sometimes orders get entered incorrectly in the system, but I always correct them when—" Eleanor raised a hand, silencing him mid-sentence. Her expression hadn't changed, but something in her posture had shifted almost imperceptibly. "Let's not waste each other's time," she said, her voice still gentle but now carrying an edge of steel. "I've observed you all evening. You've added phantom items to at least 3 bills that I've seen, including my own. I'm curious, how long have you been supplementing your income this way?" Jason felt the floor tilting beneath him. Denial seemed pointless now. This woman had clearly been watching him systematically, cataloging his movements with professional precision. It's not," he struggled, unable to form a coherent defense against such direct accusation. "Who are you exactly?" he finally managed. "Someone who believes restaurant patrons deserve honesty," Eleanor replied, her gaze unwavering. "Someone who understands how hard servers work, how challenging the job can be, and how inadequate the compensation often is." She took a deliberate sip of her coffee, "and someone profoundly disappointed by what I've seen tonight." The soufflé arrived, delivered by a nervous-looking Alicia, who'd clearly sensed the tension at the table. Eleanor thanked her warmly, then returned her attention to Jason. "It's a shame," she continued as if there had been no interruption. "You have natural charm, good timing, excellent memory for orders. All the makings of a truly exceptional server." Jason remained frozen in place, a condemned man awaiting sentence. His mind raced through options: outright denial, tearful confession, anger, bargaining. But something told him none would work with this woman. She'd seen through him with disturbing ease, had possibly been watching him for much longer than just tonight. "I should get back to my other tables," he said finally, making a weak attempt to escape the increasingly uncomfortable confrontation. Eleanor's smile tightened slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to communicate that their conversation was far from concluded. Whatever was happening here was outside his control now. "Your section is being covered," Eleanor replied calmly, nodding toward where Kevin, the floor manager, was now attending to Jason's tables. "He seems quite capable. Please, stay seated." Again, the polite phrasing did nothing to disguise the command. "We have important matters to discuss before I finish my dessert." Jason's eyes darted to Kevin, who was studiously avoiding looking in their direction. This was planned, coordinated. His unease deepened into genuine fear, not just for his job, which he clearly had already lost, but for potential legal consequences. Fraud charges, maybe even arrest, if this woman decided to make an example of him. "How many customers have you overcharged during your employment here?" Eleanor asked, her tone almost curious rather than accusatory. "Ballpark figure is fine. I'm trying to understand the scope of the situation." She took a delicate bite of her soufflé, watching him over the spoon with those piercing gray eyes. The direct question, delivered so matter-of-factly, broke something in Jason's carefully constructed facade. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Maybe 3 or 4 per shift, small amounts usually. Most people don't notice or don't bother questioning if they do." The confession hung in the air between them. 3 or 4 per shift, 5 shifts per week. For 18 months, Eleanor calculated aloud, setting her spoon down precisely alongside her plate. "That's approximately 1,000 customers you've defrauded. 1,000 instances of betraying the very trust you were employed to maintain." Each word landed like a judgment. Jason's shoulders slumped in defeat. Put like that, the scale of his actions was undeniable, indefensible. "It started small," he offered weakly. "Just occasional. Then it got easier. I told myself the restaurant could afford it, that customers wouldn't miss a few dollars here and there." The justification sounded pathetic even to his own ears. "The financial impact isn't the point," Eleanor said firmly, "though I suspect it's more substantial than you're admitting. The real damage is to the reputation of this establishment, to the trust of our patrons, to the integrity of an experience people save for and look forward to." Her use of "our" confirmed what Jason had begun to suspect. "You're the new owner," he stated flatly, the final piece clicking into place. His stomach nodded as the full implications registered. Not just a random customer catching him in the act, but the actual proprietor, someone with the power to do far more than simply fire him. His career in food service was likely over. Eleanor inclined her head slightly, neither confirming nor denying his conclusion. "What matters is what happens next," she said, returning to her soufflé with the same methodical precision. "I believe in appropriate consequences, Jason. Not necessarily the harshest, but certainly the most instructive, for everyone involved." Around them, the restaurant continued to function smoothly. Other servers moving efficiently between tables, guests engaged in their meals and conversations. No one seemed to notice the quiet reckoning taking place at the window table, where Jason sat pale-faced and sweating opposite an elderly woman enjoying her dessert with apparent serenity. Are you going to press charges?" Jason finally asked, his voice cracking slightly. The question had been circling in his mind since her accusation became impossible to deny. Fraud was a criminal offense. She had evidence. His entire future hung on her response to this single, terrifying question. Eleanor considered him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "That depends," she said finally, "on whether I believe this was a pattern of deliberate fraud you're likely to repeat elsewhere, or a series of poor choices made by someone capable of genuine change." She set down her spoon. "Which would you say it is, Jason?" The question struck him as a test, perhaps his final opportunity to demonstrate some redeeming quality. "I've been wrong," he admitted, abandoning his practiced charm for painful honesty. "Very wrong. I could blame circumstances or finances, but ultimately I chose to do this. Repeatedly. I'm not sure why you should believe I'd change." Something shifted in Eleanor's expression, not softening exactly, but a subtle acknowledgement of his unexpected candor. "Self-awareness is uncommon," she observed, "especially in someone caught red-handed." She took a final bite of her soufflé, chewed thoughtfully, then placed her napkin beside her plate with deliberate care. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her decision apparently made. "You're going to bring me my check, the accurate one. I'm going to pay for exactly what I ordered. Then you're going to join me and the management team in the office, where we'll discuss restitution for the customers you've defrauded." Jason nodded numbly, rising on unsteady legs to retrieve her check. As he moved through the restaurant toward the terminal, he felt as though everyone was watching him, though logically, he knew most staff remained unaware of what had transpired. Only Kevin's knowing glance confirmed that others understood the gravity of the situation. He returned with the check, placing it carefully beside Eleanor's empty dessert plate. She examined it thoroughly, comparing it with what she'd ordered. Finding it accurate, she nodded once, then extracted a credit card from her purse. "Honesty suits you better," she remarked, handing him the card. "Even if it comes too late." When Jason returned with the processed payment, Eleanor was standing, gathering her belongings with unhurried movements. "After you," she said, gesturing toward the back of the restaurant where the management offices were located. The gentle command left no room for debate or escape. His walk of shame had begun. The staff room fell silent as they entered, conversations halting mid-sentence. Present were Kevin, the floor manager, Diana, the general manager, and Marcus, the chef. All watching with expressions ranging from disappointment to poorly concealed satisfaction at Jason's evident downfall. They'd known. Perhaps they'd always known. "Please, everyone sit," Eleanor directed, taking the chair at the head of the table with natural authority. Only then did Jason notice the stack of documents before her, printouts of transaction records, his transaction records, with suspicious patterns highlighted in alarming yellow. His scheme laid bare in undeniable detail. "For those who haven't been formally introduced, I'm Eleanor Blackwood, the new owner of Chez Lumiere," she began, her voice clear and commanding despite its softness. "I've spent the evening observing operations, particularly focusing on some accounting discrepancies that were flagged during my review of the books." Jason stared at the table, unable to meet the eyes of his colleagues. They'd suspected him. That much was clear from their unsurprised expressions, but had lacked either evidence or authority to confront him directly. Now both had arrived in the form of this formidable elderly woman whose appearance had so fatally deceived him. "Jason has been systematically overcharging customers," Eleanor continued, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "Adding items not ordered, then removing them if questioned. Most often targeting those he believed wouldn't notice. Elderly patrons, business dinners with multiple courses, intoxicated guests." Diana, the general manager, cleared her throat. "Miss Blackwood, we had suspicions, but without concrete evidence." She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the implication that management had failed in its oversight. Eleanor nodded once, acknowledging the difficulty without absolving the responsibility. The tension in the room thickened. "The system logged everything," Eleanor explained, tapping the documents before her. "Every phantom appetizer, every wine upgrade, every accidental double charge. The pattern is unmistakable once you know what to look for." She turned her gaze to Jason. "Would you care to tell your colleagues how long this has been happening?" All eyes turned to him, awaiting his response. Jason swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "About a year," he admitted, the words barely audible. "Maybe a little longer." The collective intake of breath around the table confirmed what he'd suspected. They'd known something was wrong, but not the duration or extent of his deception. Eleanor allowed the confession to hang in the air for a long moment before continuing. "By my calculation, based on transaction records and observed patterns, customers have been overcharged approximately $27,000 during that time." The figure caused gasps around the table. Even Jason blanched at the total. "That's impossible," he protested weakly. "I never took that much, maybe a few thousand at most." Even as the denial left his lips, Jason realized how incriminating it was, an admission disguised as a defense, confirming guilt while quibbling over amounts. Eleanor's expression remained unchanged, as if she'd anticipated exactly this response. $15 here, $20 there, she replied calmly. "Small enough to fly under the radar, large enough to accumulate. Did you think the money simply disappeared from our accounting? Every fraudulent charge affected our bottom line, our pricing decisions, potentially even staff wages and benefits." The implications of his actions expanded beyond individual customers to the entire restaurant operation. Jason hadn't considered this broader impact, or more accurately, had deliberately avoided considering it. His colleagues' expressions hardened as they processed what Eleanor was saying. His theft had potentially harmed them all. "What happens now?" Kevin asked, breaking the tense silence. "Do we involve the police?" The question hung in the air, voicing what everyone was thinking. Jason held his breath, awaiting Eleanor's response. His future, whether he'd leave in handcuffs or merely in disgrace, rested entirely in her hands. Eleanor considered for a moment before responding. "That would be the standard procedure," she acknowledged. "And it remains an option." She turned her penetrating gaze back to Jason. "However, I believe in proportional consequences and in the possibility of redemption when genuine remorse is demonstrated." Jason straightened slightly, a flicker of desperate hope kindling despite himself. Was she suggesting there might be some outcome besides criminal charges? He remained silent, afraid any word from him might tip the scales back toward the harshest punishment. The room was utterly still, everyone waiting for Eleanor's decision. "Here are my terms," Eleanor said finally, her voice firm. "Jason will pay back every fraudulent charge we can document. He'll write personal apologies to any customer we can identify. He'll work without tips for 3 months, with that money going directly into the restitution fund. And he'll attend the ethical business practices course I require for all management trainees." Confusion rippled through the room. Jason's head snapped up, certain he'd misheard. "Management trainee?" he echoed, disbelief evident in his voice. "You're not firing me?" The question burst out before he could stop himself, giving voice to the astonishment everyone clearly shared. Eleanor's mouth curved in a small, tight smile. "Firing you would be easier," she acknowledged, "and perhaps more satisfying in the short term. But it would also send you to another restaurant where this behavior might continue." She folded her hands on the table. "I prefer to convert problems into assets whenever possible. You have talent, Jason, misapplied but undeniable." The assembled staff exchanged bewildered glances. This was not the outcome any of them had expected, least of all Jason, who sat frozen in shock, struggling to process this unexpected turn. Eleanor continued, her voice taking on a harder edge despite the apparent clemency she was offering. "Make no mistake," she clarified, "this is probation, not forgiveness. One more incident, even the slightest hint of dishonesty, and I will pursue legal action to the fullest extent possible. Additionally, you'll be working directly under my supervision, where every transaction you handle will receive special scrutiny." The conditions were stringent, the oversight would be constant, and the financial penalty substantial. Yet compared to arrest, prosecution, and the end of his career, it felt like an impossible reprieve. "Why?" Jason asked, the question escaping before he could consider its wisdom. "Why give me another chance at all?" Eleanor's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Because 46 years ago someone gave me one," she replied simply. "I made different mistakes, but serious ones nonetheless. Instead of firing me, my mentor taught me that restaurants aren't just about food and profit. They're about trust, integrity, and community." Her words settled into the room like a revelation. This wasn't just about Jason, or even Chez Lumiere. It was about Eleanor's vision for what restaurants could and should be. Her unexpected mercy wasn't weakness, it was strategy, turning a liability into a potential strength through accountability and reformation rather than simple punishment. "I don't deserve this opportunity," Jason admitted, his voice steadier now as the reality of his situation settled in. "But I swear I won't waste it." The promise sounded hollow even to his own ears. Words were easy in moments of crisis. Actions would be the true test, and he knew every eye in the restaurant would be watching. "No, you don't deserve it," Eleanor agreed candidly. "You've betrayed the trust of customers, colleagues, and this establishment. Earning back that trust will be far harder than simply starting over elsewhere." Her gray eyes held his with unflinching intensity. "That's precisely why this is your consequence, because it's the harder path." Diana cleared her throat again, clearly still processing this unexpected turn. "Miss Blackwood, are you certain about this? The staff may have difficulty accepting Jason in any authority position after what's happened." The concern was valid. Trust, once broken, resisted easy repair. The other managers nodded in agreement. "They'll follow your lead," Eleanor replied simply. "If management demonstrates that accountability and growth are valued over punishment, staff will adjust accordingly." She turned to address the room collectively. "This isn't leniency, it's strategic rehabilitation. Jason has skills this restaurant needs, provided they're properly channeled." The conversation continued for another hour, establishing payment schedules, oversight protocols, and expectations for Jason's probationary period. Throughout, he remained largely silent, still stunned by this unexpected chance and increasingly aware of just how demanding Eleanor's mercy would actually be. When they finally emerged from the office, the restaurant was closing for the night. Staff looked up curiously, clearly having heard rumors of what had transpired. Jason felt their eyes on him, some accusatory, others merely curious. Whatever Eleanor had decided, his reputation among his peers had been irreparably damaged. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp," Eleanor instructed him as they prepared to leave. "We'll begin reviewing transaction records to identify affected customers." Her voice softened slightly as she added, "This is your one chance, Jason. I suggest you use it wisely." With that, she gathered her coat and departed. Jason stood alone in the restaurant that had almost become the scene of his professional execution, now transformed into an unexpected arena for redemption. He hadn't just been caught. He'd been seen through completely by a woman whose age and apparent vulnerability he'd fatally misjudged. The next morning arrived with brutal swiftness. Jason entered Chez Lumiere at precisely 8:55 a.m., fighting the urge to flee rather than face what lay ahead. Eleanor was already there, seated in the manager's office with stacks of transaction records neatly arranged before her. Her eyes betrayed no fatigue, no hesitation, only calm determination. "Good morning, Jason," she greeted him, gesturing to the chair across from her. "We have substantial work ahead of us." Her tone was neither warm nor cold, simply matter-of-fact, as if yesterday's dramatic confrontation had been nothing more than a business meeting. For Eleanor, perhaps it had been exactly that. They worked methodically through customer records, identifying patterns in Jason's transactions that revealed his targets and techniques. The evidence was damning, undeniable, and seeing it laid out so systematically forced Jason to confront the full scope of what he'd done. Not just isolated incidents, but a sustained campaign of deception. As days passed, the staff's initial shock at his continued presence gradually transformed. Not into acceptance exactly, but into wary observation. They watched as Jason worked longer hours than anyone, as he wrote personal apologies to customers he'd deceived, as he accepted their cold shoulders and suspicious glances without complaint or excuse. Slowly, imperceptibly, something began to shift. Eleanor observed this transformation with measured satisfaction. She hadn't chosen the easy path for Jason or herself, but she believed in the power of consequence, coupled with opportunity. Each morning she arrived before anyone else, reviewing Jason's previous day's work with meticulous attention. No detail escaped her, no shortcut went unnoticed. "Why are you really doing this?" Jason finally asked one evening, after they'd spent hours reconciling transaction records. "You could have hired 10 honest servers for the trouble I'm causing you." The question had been building for weeks, his curiosity about this unusual woman's motives growing stronger as he came to understand the exceptional nature of his second chance. Eleanor set down her pen, considering him thoughtfully. "Restaurants aren't just businesses," she said finally. "They're complex ecosystems of trust. When I was younger, I nearly destroyed one through arrogance and shortcuts. Someone saw potential in me worth salvaging. I've spent 40 years proving them right." She resumed her work without further explanation. Gradually, restitution payments were made, apology letters sent, and the formal accounting of Jason's fraud completed. The total, nearly $30,000 over 18 months, stunned him into a week of silent introspection. The scale of his actions, laid bare in irrefutable detail, forced a confrontation with himself he'd previously avoided. 6 months after that fateful evening, Eleanor called Jason into her office. The restaurant had stabilized under her ownership, with subtle improvements to service, menu, and atmosphere that had increased both customer satisfaction and profitability. Jason had been instrumental in several of these changes, his insight into operational weaknesses proving unexpectedly valuable. "Your probationary period ends today," Eleanor informed him, her expression as unreadable as ever. "You've met all conditions: financial restitution, ethical training, supervised service. The question now is whether you've truly changed or simply performed convincingly under scrutiny." Her gaze held his, searching for truth beyond words. Jason considered his response carefully. 6 months ago, he would have said whatever she wanted to hear. Charm had always been his default. Now he found himself unwilling to offer anything but honesty. "I don't know if people truly change," he admitted, "but I know I see things differently now. Every customer, every transaction, every interaction matters." Eleanor nodded slowly, something like approval flickering across her features. "Good answer," she said. "Better than promises or platitudes." She slid a folder across her desk toward him. Inside was a contract, assistant manager, with a salary that made his previous income, even with illicit supplements, seem paltry by comparison. This position comes with higher standards, Eleanor warned as Jason stared at the document in disbelief. You've seen the worst of this industry, been the worst in some ways. Now I expect you to set the example of what's best about it. Any server who does what you did will be terminated immediately. No exceptions, no second chances. Jason signed the contract with a hand that trembled slightly. Not from uncertainty, but from the weight of responsibility it represented. I won't disappoint you, he said, meaning it more than perhaps anything he'd ever said before. Eleanor's small smile acknowledged his sincerity, without requiring verbal confirmation. Years later, when Eleanor finally retired completely, turning Chez Lumiere over to new management, it was Jason who organized the farewell dinner. As he watched her move through the restaurant, greeting staff and longtime customers with equal warmth, he reflected on how thoroughly she'd transformed not just the establishment, but him as well. The elderly woman he'd once targeted as an easy mark had become his most demanding mentor and his most profound second chance.